Va a hablar el señor Matthew Blackstad, CEO de Nest Insight, que nos va a hacer una presentación sobre este tema.
Thank you. Now, let me see if the technology has innovated since we last spoke. Thank you so much for having me to speak here. I came across from the UK yesterday, and I'm not sure what time it is there now, but you'll forgive me if I become a little slow at some points. I work for a large defined contribution pension scheme called NEST, the National Employment Savings Trust. You see my jet lag is already making me forget the name of the organization I work for. The National Employment Savings Trust was set up by the government in the UK to be the default receiver of people who are automatically enrolled into a private pension through their employer. I'm going to speak a little bit about those reforms, because although what I'm speaking to you about now is in the area of engagement and education, we're part of what is one of the larger examples of using behavioral economics to increase the participant population in the private savings system around the world. As I'll show you later on, we've now got nearly 10 million people who are newly saving into a private pension through their employer because of these reforms. And one of the things I really want to try and focus on, and I think one of the things which I hope the story of Nest, as I tell you the story of Nest, it will help illustrate, is I think very often when we think about behavioral economics, which is about nudging people into doing things, and we think about education and information, which is about making people better at doing things based on information and choice, we tend to think of those two things as opposite or as a binary choice. You either nudge people and treat them as if they're just like sheep going through a set of gates to go through the sheep dip and be treated, or you tend to think about people as being intelligent economic actors and we simply need to increase their capability. And those two things are seen very differently. One of the things I'd like to do in the next 15 or 20 minutes is say why we at Nest believe those two things need to work very closely together. So what I'll try and do, if I can, is set up the discussion that we're going to be hearing in the next two sessions. In this session about education and engagement, and in the next session about the use of behavioral economics, and try and just put them together and see how they work together. One of the things I think it's important to say is that because I'm speaking about the system in the UK where we rely very heavily on employers, we call it our second pillar. It's the main part of the private pension system in the UK. What I won't be speaking about is the informal economy, and I know that's one of the big topics of discussion today is people who don't have a formal employer. That is an area we're looking at very closely in the UK because that now represents about 1/7 of the UK working population. But everything I'll say now will be about people who work for employers. It could be a big employer, it could just be a company with 3 employees. But they're all formally employed. But I hope some of the lessons I'm going to share can be applied just as much to other sections of the working economy as well. So I want to start just by saying, if I can get the button to work, yes, I want to start just by saying a little bit about the unit that I run the research program for, which is called Nest Insight. This is within the Nest pension scheme, and it's been set up quite recently as the place where we do a lot of collaborative research programs. So very similar to the IDB initiative, the lab initiative that we were just hearing about. What we're trying to do is apply behavioral economic theory and some of the best academic insights from around the world and use the Nest membership of many millions of people as a laboratory where we can test different innovations. And we've only just started on that journey, and some of the things I'm going to talk about at the end of this presentation represent some of the main areas of new development and new research that we're doing, where I can't give you answers, but hopefully I can share a little bit about the journey that we've been on. I think one of the things which oh, the slide doesn't seem to be building right. Hopefully you can read it okay. One of the things that we find when we look at the private pension system, the voluntary savings system, is that there's a big difference between what we would think of as being the ideal situation and the situation that actually applies in reality. So on the left here, I'm afraid it's a bit grayed out, you can see that people are, in the ideal journey, are expected to join and start saving very early, maybe in their 20s. And actually, on the right, you can see that actually most people never get around to doing that. On the left-hand side, you can see that what we hope they do in the system is contribute regularly right through their lives. So maybe it's a small amount each month, but they keep doing that regularly. In fact, what we find is that people move in and out of the system. They might contribute now, then the next year they don't contribute. And that's a problem because it makes it much harder to invest their money in a sustainable way. Thirdly, we tend to think that they will simply become engaged because this is important and because their retirement's important. We think that they will become engaged and they'll seek information and they'll educate themselves to become better at saving in a pension. But in reality, most people never think about it. It's at the back of their mind, not the front of their mind. And then finally, we think that when people reach retirement in the private saving system, they have a big pot of money. They're going to make some really intelligent choices about what to do with it. But in reality, most people will just take the default option that's offered for them about how to receive an income in retirement. So there's a big difference between how we should behave as savers and then how we actually behave in reality. And fundamentally, the insights of behavioral economics are about recognizing that difference. And this is really about understanding the role that human biases play. So if we think about these trade-offs that we're always having to make between things that give us pleasure today and things that will give us pleasure in the future, we can think about our health. I shouldn't eat that beef burger that I had for supper last night. That will make me happy in the short term, but in the long term, it will make me less happy because I will be fat. In saving, it's the same. I should put some money out of my pay packet into my pension because that will make me happier in the future, but it makes me happier to spend that money today. The fact is, we don't balance these present and future benefits equally. As humans, we're very... something really magical is going to happen in a moment. Has anyone got the ability to push that forward with a button? There, you see. What happens in reality is that we weight present benefits much, much more highly than we do future ones. We're short-term animals. That's how we've evolved. Now, there are many, many different human biases that make it difficult for us to be sensible pension savers. And I'll talk about a few of those in a moment in my presentation. You'll hear much more about them today. But fundamentally, I think this is the really key one. Valuing present benefits over future benefits means we very rarely act in our own interests. And the insights of behavioral economics as a theory is to start thinking much more in terms of what those biases are and how they affect our behavior, rather than trying to think too rationally about how people should act based on the incentives that they have. And where this gets you to, and this is the fundamental divide that I was describing earlier on, is to a world where if you looked at the pensions, the private pensions policy system in the UK maybe 20 years ago, it was based on what's described here as the old way of thinking. This is an idea of informed choice. We'll create a good, well-governed pension system, a private saving system, where people are incentivized to save. And then, because there are going to be some big asymmetries of information, the providers of those pensions will know much more than the savers. We'll fix those asymmetries. We'll educate people. We'll turn them into much more rational economic actors. And the problem is that that just doesn't work. We've had a very robust system of providing education, providing information in the United Kingdom for many years, and it had really no impact on behavior. The only things that changed behavior was when an advisor got you to save or your employer got you to save, and they did it for you. And that's one of the reasons why, taking on board the insights of behavioral economics, we've now moved in the UK to a system the new way here, behavioral finance, which is basically where we think the fundamental challenge to overcome is our behavioral biases, our human frailties, the fact that we're not very good at self-control. And so now we start nudging people. We start putting in new defaults and simpler ways of making sure that if people follow the grain of their human behavior, then they will end up saving rather than not saving. And in the UK, this has been done through legislation. This is, again, just within the workplace savings system, the private workplace savings system. Previously, this is before 2006, when these new laws were introduced. The system was that from the point of view of the employee, if they joined an employer and they did nothing else, they would not be saving, because they had to make an active choice to join the pension. The employer could choose whether or not they were going to make a contribution on behalf of the individual, so there wasn't very much incentive because most employers weren't offering that. And then the marketplace, the insurance companies who provided the pension plans, really weren't very interested in a lot of people as savers. They weren't interested in people with lower income. They weren't interested in people who moved from job to job very quickly. And so and people who work for small employers as well, very rarely looked very profitable to them. So if you put those three pieces together, you had a system where it was very unusual to save. You were in the minority if you saved. What we have now with the new laws is a system that's changed all three of those things. So now, from the employee's point of view, if you join a new employer and you make no active choice, you will be saving. Okay, that's the default option. You've been automatically enrolled by your employer. The employer has to do the work. You can choose to opt out, so it remains a voluntary system, but the default is to save. The employer also has to make a contribution. The employer and the employee normally both contribute, but the employer has a minimum amount that they need to contribute to the defined contribution pension normally. And then Nest, the scheme I work for, that's been set up as a provider which any employer can choose to use. So unlike any other employer, we have a legal duty where if an employer comes to us and says, I want to enroll these 2 people who don't earn very much money, we'd like them to join Nest, we're legally obliged to say yes. And that means we now have universal coverage. The market will provide for everyone. And what that's achieved is already pretty large scale. So we've just completed the process of rolling this out. Just last month, we completed the process of getting every employer in the UK to introduce this auto-enrollment. We now have 9 million people who are saving through auto-enrollment. They weren't saving before, now they're saving. That's close to a third of the working population in the UK. And most of those people are in Nest because they're lower earning, because they work for a small employer. We've currently got about £2.6 billion of assets which we're investing for those people. And although that sounds like a very big number to me, my investment colleagues tell me that's really only the beginning. We'll soon be a 20 million, 30 million, a billion pound pension plan. The really interesting thing, though, and this is the insight of behavioral economics, is only, of all those people who've been enrolled, only 8% of those people have opted out. Many people estimated that many more people would stop saving as soon as they were enrolled, but actually 8% have opted out. So this is a majority thing now. Most people are saving. And most people like it. When we do surveys, people tell us they think auto-enrollment's a really good idea. But here's the really key thing, I think, for this discussion, which is when you auto-enroll people, they have made no active choice. They haven't engaged. They haven't considered the option. It is simply done to them. And so when we look at the behavior of that population, only 13% of the population have gone online to check their details or make a change in their accounts. It's a very small percentage. Even smaller percentages, less than 1%, have either made an additional contribution or chosen to change their investments. So over 99% of people are following the default product options that are offered to them by the reforms. And that creates in itself quite a big challenge. The other challenge when we think about trying to engage people and maybe move them out of that inertia is the sheer scale of what we're doing in the UK. This just shows the rate with which the number of employers who've come into auto-enrollment has risen over the last 3 years. On a busy day for Nest over the last year, we had 1,200 employers, new employers, signing up with Nest and starting to enroll their workers, which is a scale no one's ever seen in the world before. So that's quite hard. It's quite hard to make things individualized or tailored to suit their needs when you're dealing with quite such a big scale. So that's where I just want to spend the rest of the time I'm talking to you, just covering some of the things that we've learned and some of the things that we've done to try and overcome those barriers to getting people engaged. I think, first of all, the most important barrier to think about is when we think about educating and engaging people, we don't always mean the same thing. And I think it's quite important to think about what the outcome is that we're looking to achieve. When you've got a default system like we have in the UK, everyone's in, pretty much. Some of them may be doing something that's about right. They may not need to make any different choices right now. Them just keeping on saving is maybe the best thing for them. Other people, particularly as they get older, might need to change their contributions, might need to make an active choice of some kind. So I think the first thing to think about is what's the outcome we're looking to get people to follow. And this is where our behavioral research program comes in, because we can track very closely the behaviors that people have when they go and make a change online, when they register, when they respond to an email. Those behaviors, I think, are the things that we should really be focusing on when we talk about trying to get people engaged. The other thing just to bear in mind is that when we look at where people are at the moment and what they're feeling about being auto-enrolled, although, as I said, they're quite pleased to be enrolled, at the moment, they're not in a very happy place. So these are just some of the statistics from our recent surveys. Only 16% of people who've been auto-enrolled say they feel more comfortable, that they're doing the right thing. That's a very low number. You would hope that people would feel happy that they've been auto-enrolled, but they're still really worried about their retirement. When we ask people, why haven't you done anything active for yourself? Nearly half of people say, I'm just really worried about making the wrong choice. People don't feel empowered or capable of doing what's right for them. And you can see why when you find out that when we ask people if they have enough knowledge and information, only 15% say they have. So although we've got this very big and successful system, we clearly have a big gap. Now, you could argue that it's fine just to let the system do its work. We've only started doing this in the last few years in the UK. If you look at a system like Australia, where there's been compulsory enrollment for decades now, you have found a lot of these sorts of indicators have shifted quite a lot. People become more engaged, more active, more knowledgeable, simply by the fact that they've been enrolled into a pension. And we do start to see this in the UK. So if we look at the same survey data, just two questions I have here on this slide, where we saw a huge change just 2 years after the start of auto-enrollment. When we asked people, is this a good idea? Initially, less than half of people said it was a good idea. That very quickly rose to 2/3 of people, just over a couple of years. When we asked people who had opted out, who had chosen not to save, when we asked them, next time you get enrolled, will you stay enrolled? Initially, that was only 41%. Sorry, that was only 19%. And that doubled in just 1 year in terms of results. So this idea of normalization, the idea that when you just default people, you set up a standard system for everyone, that it just gets people more involved in the system and more engaged the longer you leave it. That is quite a powerful idea. But the problem is, back to the slides I was just showing you, all those people are doing the same thing unless they make some active choices. So you can't overcome that barrier of individual choice and individual tailoring without some form of engagement. So normalization is only part of the story. So I'm just going to talk you through 3 or 4 things we've done when we set up Nest that we think really helped start us on this journey, and then 3 things that we're now researching and that we hope will take that journey forward. The first thing is language. We are all, in our system, we're all very technically expert. We all understand a lot of things. We all know how the system works, and it's very easy for us to forget that ordinary people on low incomes have no idea what any of what we're saying means. It's such an easy mistake to make. And what we did, one of the things where we really found this was we looked at the terminology that we used in the UK to talk to customers about pensions. And it was often very long technical terms, often based on sort of Latin and Greek words that weren't the normal, sort of in our country, Anglo-Saxon words that people normally use. So when we were talking about taking some of your pension pot as cash at retirement, we had this phrase, trivial commutation, that nobody understood. In Nest, we did some research. We actually did some collaborative work with savers, with consumers, and got them to design their own terms. And they told us to call it taking your pot as cash. Now, why we hadn't thought of that before, I don't know. But we realized this was a really important difference. And we found the level of engagement that people had just by using words that they used instead of words that we use made a huge difference to the level of engagement. So I do recommend if you feel sort of happy about the fact that it's an English language publication, if you want to look at this document, the Nest Phrase Book, which is on our website, that contains that story and tells you how we did that. The second thing I think is really key, and this is based on a very sort of that behavioral insight I was talking about earlier on around our present bias. Because we're so focused on things that matter to us today, it's very hard to engage people in their pension by showing them a picture of someone who's age 65 and is standing on a beach, and is very happy with their grandchildren. Because when I'm 25, I don't care about that. That's not who I am today. And we have very strong psychological barriers to thinking about ourselves as an old person. In fact, we find it very uncomfortable. So a lot of work by behavioral scientists, people like Hal Hirschfield, recently has been looking at how to overcome this sense of future self-difference. And we've hit on one which we think is quite effective, which is just to talk to people, and again, these are people on lower incomes, talk to them about the small pleasures that they enjoy today. What are the things that when you've got a little bit of money, you spend that money on today, not in the future, today. And it was things like going out dancing, or playing football, or going and watching your favorite sports team, or just going out and eating a meal. And we said, well, don't you want to enjoy doing that when you're 70? And we made some viral videos with 70-year-old guys playing football and 70-year-old ladies doing some dancing. And these were really popular. And all that's doing is saying, think about you now, and then just push that forward into the future. And just overcoming that psychological difference between yourself and now and yourself in the future seems to have a really huge impact. So focus on the now is a very, very key thing. The other thing, and I think this is more fundamental really, and really core to the design of Nest as a product designed for low-income people who've been auto-enrolled, is design your product to suit the needs of the people. Don't start with a traditional pension product and then auto-enroll people into it and assume it will work, because it really won't. So our investment approach is quite unusual in two ways. One is that we assume that people won't make a choice about their investments. And that means we need to invest their money in a way that suits them. You saw the statistic, 99.5% of people in Nest didn't choose their investments. So that puts a huge responsibility on us to invest the money in a way that suits most people. And we've done it in a very simple way. We just divided them all up into one-year age groups. So we have over 40 different funds. And so everyone who's going to retire in 20 years' time, for instance, we treat all those people as being one individual who's got a very big amount of money, even though each individual's contribution to that pot is quite small. We pool all their money together, and we invest it as if we had a really affluent individual who had 20 years until retirement. And what's the best way we could create a risk-managed glide path for them to retirement? And that's given us huge economies of scale. We can offer them really sophisticated, diversified investments very, very cheaply, just by assuming people won't make choices. For those who do make choices, though, we also recognize a lot of the behavioral insights that show that when you give people too many choices, they're less likely to make a choice. So if you give people 200 investments, they go, my God, that's too many choices, I can't choose. If you give them, as we do, 5 alternative investments, they're much more likely to find it easy to choose. And we've designed the labels on those, again, to make it very clear what those choices are for. We don't have, mixed ethnic market, compound fund, whatever. We try to use the language that people would use. And that's made it feel much more accessible. People, even if they don't make choices, like to feel in control. They like to feel empowered. And so if you design products that have the simplicity that suits that preference, even if they don't make choices, they'll feel much more in control of what's being done for them. So those are the things that we've done to date in our design of Nest. And I just want to finish, if the clicker will work. That's going backwards. That's not so good. Oh, and I should just say, can someone take that forward? Is there anyone who's got control of that? Because this is going backwards now. Here we are. One more document I'll just point you to, which tells the story of what we've done so far on our website, is a document called Our Golden Rules, the Nest Golden Rules of Communication. This really just summarizes some of the principles I've just talked about. So you can see principle 3, they're out with the old. That's that principle of talking about things people enjoy today. So that's what we've done so far. I just want to finish with the 3 areas of work that we're currently engaged with in the Nest Insight program. The first of them is to try to understand the role of of emotions in people's experience of a pension. We tend to think about pensions and finance as being very abstract and very theoretical, and money as being something that's sort of spreadsheets and technical choices. But for human beings, it's something that's very emotional. When I have a conversation with my wife about money, it's very emotional, right? I think we all know that experience. So why do we talk to people about their money as though it's quite cold and abstract? When people are asked to think about what they feel about their pension, they'll give us answers, some examples here that people have actually said to us when we've done research, that are very emotionally based. So one of the things we're doing at the moment, working with some colleagues at the University of Maastricht, is looking at all the things people say to Nest when they contact us, and just analyzing those texts for their emotional content. And what we're hoping is that by relating that to when people do or don't make active choices, or do or don't feel more informed, we can understand how to promote the emotions that make them more engaged, and hopefully just dampen down the emotions that make them less engaged. So that's one really interesting area of work for us. Secondly, going through rather quickly. Secondly, events, life events, things which in the theory today get called teachable moments, things which happen to you. You fall pregnant, you buy a home, you experience the death of a loved one, you start a new career path. All of these things change us, and they create an interesting form of openness to new choices and new opportunities. it can be quite hard to identify when those are happening to people. And I've just shown you a little view here of the map that we've created of people's life experiences that we're using as the basis for our research. But when we do see something change in someone's life, it's a really important and good opportunity to contact them and give them a choice that they can make that suits that moment in their life. So the more we can think about people not as just an age group or a gender, but think about them as a human being who's at a particular stage in their life and maybe just starting a new experience, the more powerful. And then the final point I want to make, because this session is supposed to be about education, is to talk about the work we're doing to try and think about how to use education better in an auto-enrollment plan. I said at the beginning that if you just try to educate people in a workplace, it doesn't change their choices. But there's a lot of really interesting research, particularly being done by the University of Southern California at the moment, which is around creating much more small, modular, simple pieces of information that you can target people with at the point where they have to make a choice. And you don't necessarily expect them to remember everything, you don't necessarily expect them to understand everything, but it's just about giving them the small piece of education that they need when they're doing a particular task. And so we're about to start running a trial here where we use that approach with a nest, and rather than giving people one big piece of information, one big piece of education, we give them small little modules of education information, and we test how effective those are. I think you're going to hear a little bit more about how effective that works when we hear the Kiwi Wealth example in a moment. So with that, I'll leave you, and thank you very much for your time and for having me here today. I'd be very happy to share more of my experiences if you just want to come and talk to me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Matthew. Ahora pasamos a escuchar la presentación de Joe Bishop. Joe Bishop es el gerente de producción e innovación para el cliente de Kiwi Wealth. Como gerente de producción e innovación para el cliente, Joe Bishop es responsable de liderar aspectos relacionados con el desarrollo, distribución, innovación y mercadeo de los productos y servicios de Kiwi Wealth, Nueva Zelanda. Una de sus funciones claves ha sido el desarrollar la oferta de asesoramiento digital de Kiwi Wealth a través de propuestas dirigidas a los clientes, logrando aumentar el compromiso y la capacidad financiera de los mismos. Joe Bishop cuenta con más de 15 años de experiencia en servicios financieros tanto en Londres como en Nueva Zelanda. Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed Matthew's speech. There are a number of key themes that Matthew spoke about, which are going to be echoed in what I'm going to speak about today. I'm really delighted to be here. Don't be put off by the English accent. I've actually come all the way from New Zealand, where I've lived for the last 9 years. It's the middle of the night still in New Zealand, so excuse me if I wander off topic a little bit. I'm still adjusting to the time difference. But I'm delighted to be here. This is a topic I feel very passionately about. And I'm really delighted to be able to share the experiences we've had at Kiwi Wealth around overcoming financial inertia through customer engagement and looking also at financial capability. It's the top topic, as I see, for pension providers. And so we looked at the way that we were operating about 4 years ago. We looked at the communications that we were putting out, and we looked at our relationship with our members as a pension provider. And we decided 4 years ago that everything we did was wrong. And we had to change it all, and we had to start again from scratch. It was an interesting message for me to deliver to the CEO and then to the board. But luckily enough, they were very supportive. And over the last 4 years, we've been on a journey where we've looked at not just the communications that we provide to our members, not just the customer experience that they receive, but more importantly, the operating model within our business that produced those outcomes. And we recognised that all of those needed to change if we wanted to move the needle at all when it came to customer engagement. So what I want to do this morning is just to take a bit of time to talk through the challenges that we've faced with customer engagement, how we've gone about addressing those, and impart with you 5 key lessons that we've learned during those last 4 years. Just to start off with, just a little bit about Kiwi Wealth as an organisation, and then I'll also speak about KiwiSaver, which is the retirement savings initiative in New Zealand. So for Kiwi Wealth, we are 100% owned by the New Zealand government agencies, much like Nest. But much like Nest, we operate in a purely competitive commercial environment. We get no favours from the government at all. And so we have to work in an environment where pension provision is highly portable, and so we have to operate in that competitive environment, and so we have to adapt to the market forces and help shape those market forces. At the moment, we've got almost 200,000 members in our pension scheme, the KiwiSaver scheme, and we've got close to $4 billion US dollars in funds under management. We are the 5th largest provider in New Zealand, with approximately 6% of market share of members and about 8 to 9% market share of funds under management. I don't know if we can take that back one slide. Oh. There we go. So KiwiSaver is a voluntary work-based savings scheme that was brought about by the New Zealand government in 2007. It's an auto-enroll system, which means that whenever you join, or whenever somebody joins the workforce, or they change jobs, they are auto-enrolled with a limited period then to opt out. As such, we have high levels of participation in New Zealand. So out of a population of 4.7 million, we have 2.8 million people in KiwiSaver, which is really, really high levels of participation. But what we found, as I'll cover in a minute, is actually whilst the participation levels were high, the engagement rates were really low. And whilst people are auto-enrolled and their contributions are deducted at source by the employer, there is the opportunity for people to opt out and take what is called a contributions holiday, which is a terrible term for something that invites people to then stop contributing for a period of time. On top of which, one of the major flaws for that contribution holiday is it was set up for a minimum term of 5 years, which is absolutely ridiculous. So it's actually encouraging people to, once they're in work, to actually cease contributions for a period of time. And that's what we've seen. So there's low levels of engagement. When it was set up as a scheme, the government set up what it calls a default panel. Because it's auto-enrollment, for people who have not made an active choice, they are automatically allocated to one of 10 default providers, of which we are one. Whilst this works well in participation, again, it doesn't promote engagement at all. On top of which, there are strict limits for the providers on the nature of the fund they can offer as a default fund. Most importantly, there is a cap on growth assets of 25%. They're purely conservative or defensive funds. Whilst that has some attraction or advantages in the sense that people's first experiences won't be wildly volatile returns or losses, there's obviously an issue when you look at the fact that the auto-enrollment takes place when people join the workforce, normally in their early 20s or late teens, and the fact that they're being defaulted into a conservative or a defensive fund, which is not appropriate for their age and stage in life. So, customer engagement. We looked at our levels of customer engagement 4 or 5 years ago, and we went out and did our own research, and it's really important for any provider to go out and do the research themselves and actually speak to their customers. And what we found concerned us so much that we actually decided we had to make fundamental changes to our business model. Just a few stats there on the screen. 85% of New Zealanders don't use a financial advisor. Almost 80% of people who are in the scheme have absolutely no idea what it will provide to them as either a lump sum or an income when they retire, when they turn 65. If they don't understand what it's going to provide to them when they turn 65, how will people know whether their decisions that they've made or the decisions that have been made on their behalf are correct for them? How will they know whether they're in the right fund for their risk profile, whether their timeline to retirement is correct, or whether their level of contributions are going to be sufficient? And as I mentioned earlier, a high proportion of members in KiwiSaver are sitting in these conservative, defensive default funds, which for many of them, given that they're in their teens or 20s or early 30s, are absolutely not appropriate for their timelines. We have to look at the reasons why people are not engaged. And Matthew touched on some of these earlier, and I just want to reinforce some of these themes. There are multiple challenges to getting people to engage. I've listed out a few there. The primary one is people's concept, as Matthew mentioned earlier, people's concept of themselves in the future. It's very hard for them to visualize, and it's very hard for them to engage with. It's competing with their urgent priorities today. If you think about people coming into the workforce in their late teens and early 20s, most of them are worried about how they're going to get onto the housing ladder. We have a huge issue in New Zealand with spiraling housing prices. And the vast majority of people in their 20s and 30s or even 40s, primary concern is how they're going to afford to buy a home, let alone think about what they're going to do when they retire. With these competing priorities, it's not surprising that people can't visualize the future. It's too hard, and so they just don't engage. So that's the first thing. The second point, again, touching on some themes that were mentioned earlier, people's expectations of service providers, and as a pension provider, we are a service provider, people's expectations of service providers are changed. They're being reframed by the digital experiences they're receiving online, the likes of Airbnb, Uber, Facebook. These providers do the hard work for their customers. People now don't want the provision of data. They can't work with that at all. They expect a customer service provider who knows information about them to have analysed that information and to empower them with insightful information in order that they can take action off that. Now, if you think about that in other contexts, the likes of Spotify will track what you're listening to and make recommendations to you off the back of that. Uber knows where you are and can show you where your ride is. All that analysis is done on behalf of the consumer. The consumer doesn't have to do anything at all. It's presented in a way that's already insightful for them and prompts action. Now, if you think about most pension providers and the information that we provide, and generally it is information, and unfortunately is not empowering insight, the information that most pension providers give to their consumers, give to their members, is just data. It doesn't empower them and it doesn't help them make a decision at all. We're competing for attention. That stands to reason. We see that in every walk of life. We're being crowded out. But the last two are the most important to me because as a provider, these are the two that we can do something about. As Matthew mentioned earlier, people have a fear that's driven by a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge. And instead of wanting to engage and to get that understanding and knowledge, it's easier to do nothing, which is why defaults become quite powerful as options. People are scared that if they make a decision or make a change, that they're going to break their investment. They're going to do something wrong. That's the framework that they put around it, and that's what drives non-engagement and non-behavior. What they're not recognizing often is that by doing nothing, you are also making a choice. And if that choice is to stay in a conservative or a defensive fund, and you've got a 40-year time horizon, well, it's probably not the best choice for you. And finally, there for a challenge, post-GFC, post-credit crunch, and every nation have had their own domestic issues as well. We've seen this in New Zealand with, with finance companies that didn't deliver the returns that they promised. That people, consumers, don't really trust the financial services industry. So that just creates another little micro barrier to engagement. All of which means that people are not engaged. They're not thinking about their future selves. They're not making informed decisions, and they're often not making any decisions at all. So what approach did we take in Kiwi Wealth 4 years ago when we realised that everything that we were doing was not addressing those issues at all? Well, I come from an investment background. I come from a product background within investments. I've looked after products for pensions, for investments for the last 20 years. And it was interesting and slightly uncomfortable for me to come to the conclusion that everything I've been doing for 20 years was wrong. And that I had to go right back to basics and start again. As a product person, that's not a comfortable position to be in. But that level of discomfort is absolutely required as individuals and as organizations to really challenge your thinking. What we had was a model where product people generally would sit around and come up with an idea for a fantastic product, lobby internally for 3 months in order to get the funding to build it. Then they would design for 6 to 9 months, and then there'd be another 12 months of build and IT development, another 3 months then of testing, and then it'd be released to market. And at that point you find that actually what you delivered didn't resonate with the customer at all. Or it did resonate, but it resonated with the customers 3 years ago, which is when you had the idea in the first place. What we have to do as product people is actually change the way we approach this. And there are a lot of buzzwords that will get thrown around that it's easy to be cynical about, but actually in our experience have absolutely revolutionized the way that we develop products and propositions. Terms that you'll come across if you read any HBR article, they're right there around agile, lean startup, minimum viable proposition. All of these terms, all of these approaches that the tech companies are using to develop their products and services, we absolutely need to bring into the financial services industry and into pension provision. Because at the heart is one very simple concept. You have to put the customer and their perspective at the heart of absolutely everything you do. Which sounds so obvious, and yet if you think about the way products and services have been developed in the financial services industry historically, that tends to not be the way that it was done. So if I run through just a couple of those steps, in-depth customer research. And I'm not talking about an hour-and-a-half focus group with 6 to 8 people done outside of work hours where people have often come along for free food and drink. I'm talking about actually spending significant amounts of time with your customers, going and visiting them in their homes, spending mornings and afternoons with them, deep ethnographic research to understand and help tease out from them not only what their blatant needs are, which they can express quite clearly, but often what's lurking beneath that, what their latent needs are, which they don't express directly and which you have to tease out in order to understand. And then when you start to develop and deliver, you need to keep the customer at the heart of that delivery cycle. So you need to make certain they're a part of that ongoing testing. And when you develop and deliver, don't just bring one ideal solution to market. You need to build multiple different versions, put those versions in the hands of your customers, and then see how they use them. And that's absolutely crucial. That's why you need to get back to minimum viable propositions, because you have to actually put these things in the hands of people and then watch where they click. Where does their cursor spend time? What buttons do they push? At what stage do they hover over a button for about 30 seconds and then just close the browser? And it's really important that you analyze that data and you've got access to that data. Because one of the key lessons we learned is our customers will often tell us that they're going to react in one way, but when you put the tool in their hands, they do something completely different. There's a cognitive dissonance there that as product providers we have to work with and understand. And the best way to do that is to break it down to the smallest processes, put those in front of customers, put different versions in front of customers, and then see how they react to those versions. And finally, you've got to respond to that customer feedback. And all the way through that process is a process of iteration. You have to continually refine. So that's the way that we look to change. That meant a huge change to our operating model, because we moved from having a product team that was generally focused about keeping products on market to actually looking to build an ongoing delivery team that would have regular delivery cycles that would change our products and propositions every 3 months. And those 3-month cycles of delivery had to have two focuses, both forward, how we're moving our proposition onwards, but also backward, what have we learned from the last release? What didn't work exactly as we wanted it to? And what changes are we going to make so that we can drive greater customer engagement? So I'll just finish up by running through 5 key lessons that we've learned during the last 4 years. First one, show information in ways that customers understand. I've got an example on the right-hand side of the screen, but I'm actually going to focus there on the left, I think, which is one of the key learnings for us, and it's illustrative of the way that we think as an industry as opposed to the way that our customers think, is that we use percentages all the time. We in the industry, we use percentages, whether it's for contribution rates, 3% employer, 3% employee contribution rates, or we use it for returns and risk profiling. This fund, you could see your balance go up by 20%, but it could go down by 15%. One of the very first learnings that we got when we went out and did customer testing is that as soon as you use a percentage, your customers, your members, have switched off completely. That was a huge revelation for us because we use percentages all the time. It's just natural, it's part of what we do as an industry. But for a lot of people, they don't really understand percentages, or they understand them, but it's actually too difficult for them to actually do the calculation in their head, or it's just got too boring, sorry, switch off. So what we learned, and you can see there on the left-hand side there, is when we talk to people about their contribution rates, what we needed to do was actually do the calculations for them. Again, using that kind of Uber, Airbnb approach of making it simple and interpreting the data and providing insightful, empowering information that drives decision-making rather than just the provision of information. We know how much people earn. So if we're asking them to think about whether they want to change their contribution from 3% to 4% to 8%, we do the calculations for them. So if you're contributing at 3% at the moment, that's $58 a fortnight that's coming out of your pay packet. If you move to 8%, then that'll be an extra $154. So people don't have to interpret those percentages. We've done the calculation for them. And on top of which, as people click through these radial buttons, because these are choices that are presented, the figures will update automatically. And again, at the end, you'll see there the estimated retirement income based off the different contribution rates. As you click through the radial buttons, that will update so people can see the difference that it makes. Taking customer information and putting it in a language or a lexicon that they can understand. Encourage actions by making it simple. We have a tendency to want to design and build the perfect end-to-end solution. As I mentioned earlier, that's just not feasible. It's not possible. We should put that out of our minds. We should also not try and deliver everything all at once. Break the decision-making for your members down into small, discrete decisions that can be done at the time or at a later date. If you ask somebody to go all the way through and you cannot implement change until they have looked at their contribution rate and their risk profile and their timeline to retirement, if you ask them to do those 3 things sequentially, they will drop out either at the end of the first step, halfway through the second step, or if you're really lucky, some of them might attempt the third step. But most people won't go through and do the whole lot end to end. So break them down into discrete processes, let them do one thing at a time, and then move on. And then when they come back in next time, put the second process in front of them. So do risk profiling first. And then next time they log in, do contribution analysis. Because if you make it as simple and easy as possible, more people will take action. As I mentioned earlier, a big learning for us is you're not going to get it right first time. You're really not. So you have to iterate. People have a nagging doubt that they should be doing something, but it's too hard for them to engage. And if you put any little micro barrier in front of them, they'll take that opportunity to disengage and step away. Now, we learnt this when we were looking at our risk profiling tool that we put together. We tried to get it as simple as possible. So I think we got the risk profiling tool down to 3 questions. 3 basic questions, and an interactive screen, which I showed you earlier, where people could click through the different risk profiles, low risk, medium risk, high risk in radial buttons, and see what impact that had. And even though we got it down to a really simple process, still people were not taking action. They'd get right up to the point of having to commit to a decision, and they would stop and close the browser. So we went and spoke to the members to find out why that was, and found that even though we'd provided all of that information, people were just not confident enough to make a final decision. They thought they were going to break their investment. We went back and tried a number of different ways that we could try and get people over that line, over that hump. What we found was we had a short 90-second animated video on our website, which talked about the difference in risk profiles for funds, the difference between a conservative or defensive fund or a growth fund. And it talked about that in terms people could understand using an animated video of a roller coaster ride, and how open you are to the ups and downs of a roller coaster ride to work as a proxy for volatility in the markets. We also use the concept of snakes and ladders. I don't know if that's a universal concept, but it's something in the UK people will understand. And what we did is we took that video, a piece of collateral that we already had on our website, and we just dropped it in just before we asked people to make a decision. And what we found is that saw a 50% increase in the amount of people who committed and made the decision. All that was a short video that gave people enough confidence that they understood the concepts that they would actually commit and click the button. Now, that's not something that came out originally in our research. If we'd have just designed a system that was built end-to-end and delivered and hard to amend and change, we wouldn't have been able to go back and fix that, and 50% of those people would still not be making a decision. So you've got to understand you're not going to get it right first time, and you've got to be prepared to iterate. It's great to hear Mariano speak earlier about failing. You've got to be open to the environment that you're going to fail fast, learn the lessons, and implement changes off the back of it. That's absolutely the right way to approach development. This was the start for us when we sat down and had the conversation 4 years ago about why everything we were doing was wrong. If I looked at the reporting that we gave to our members, it was all historical. It was all backward-looking. To my mind, it was just the provision of information and data, but with no empowering insight associated with it. What did we give people? We gave them their balance. It's a DC scheme, so we gave people their balance, their historic balance. Well, that's interesting. People like to know what's in their balance, but how does it help you make a decision as to whether you are on track for the retirement that you want and deserve? We talked to people about their performance. Again, that's interesting, but it's not insightful. It doesn't drive behavior at all. It was all backward-looking. What we realized was all our reporting had to change, and it had to be forward-focused. To Matthew's point earlier, how do you get people to the point where they can start to imagine themselves at 65? Most people don't want to do that. Well, you have to project forward. And that's what we started off with our reporting. All our reporting had to be future-focused. So we started by showing people a projection. And you show people as a projection, and again, this is where we learned and had to iterate. We show people a lump sum projection. This is what your balance will be when you turn 65. And we thought, brilliant, we've cracked it, forward-focused. And we suddenly realized that people had no idea whether that lump sum was good or not. Is that enough? Is it not enough? It sounds like it's a large amount, but I've got no idea. Well, what we had to do is take the next step and then take that lump sum, make some assumptions, and convert it into income. Now you've changed that frame of reference again. Everybody understands income. Everyone can benchmark that against what they're earning today and start to think, is that a lot or is that a little? And when we took that lump sum and converted it through, we were showing people that actually they were going to be on course for getting retirement income of $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year. And people were suddenly realizing that's actually not going to be enough. And so they actually have to start engaging and making some active choices in order to push that amount up. The next step was to introduce the goal. Say, okay, well, now you've got a frame of reference. Let's help you understand what you want to work towards. Once you set a goal, we can then help you close the gap between your projection and goal. So all of our reporting has to be future-focused if you want to drive action. And finally, one of the main topics over the next couple of days, need to incorporate behavioral insights. We used a model called EAST, which is an acronym for Easy, Attractive, Social, Timely. We were invited to participate in a case study by the regulator in New Zealand, the Financial Markets Authority, and we found with a simple change to our welcome and onboarding comms, we were able to drive a much higher engagement rate and getting 47% of people, 40% higher switch rate of people starting to make an active choice and moving out of the default funds, just by looking at that one piece of communication that we provide to our members. So those were the 5 key lessons that we learned over the last 4 years. As I said, our business strategy now is in line with our approach to our customer roadmap in the sense that it's constantly iterating and changes. So the next steps for us will be to always continue to look at our products and our proposition, and then see how else we can go about making it easy for our customers. The solution for that will absolutely be incorporating robo-advice into a solution for our members, recognizing that more people are now going to take advice digitally than they will speak to an advisor. That's our main method of communication going forward. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Muchas gracias, Joe. Ahora pasamos a la última presentación a cargo de Marcelo Caetano, secretario de Previsión Social del Ministerio de Hacienda de Brasil. Obtuvo su licenciatura en la Universidad Federal de Río de Janeiro e hizo estudios de doctorado en Economía en la Pontificia Universidad Católica y en la UCB. Fue profesor de Economía y Macroeconomía de la Universidad Federal Fluminense y en la Universidad Católica de Río. Economista del Instituto de Investigación de Economía Aplicada y miembro del Consejo Editorial del Journal of Social Policy, que publica la Cambridge University Press. Es coordinador general de Actuaría, Contabilidad y Estudios Técnicos del Ministerio de Previsión Social. Actuó como investigador visitante del London School of Economics, asesor de situaciones de impactos fiscales de las reformas de la seguridad social en Brasil, Ecuador y Cabo Verde, y fue coordinador de previsión del IPEA. En mayo de 2016 asumió la función de secretario de Previsión del Ministerio de Hacienda. Marcelo.
Buen día a todos. Voy a pedir disculpas porque voy a hablar en portuñol, ¿no? O en español errado, pero creo que van a comprenderme, ¿no? Y primero de todo agradecer a BID, porque este es el segundo evento aquí en Panamá que yo participo por cuenta de BID. También a todas las instituciones de Panamá por hacer un evento internacional con personas de, solo aquí en esta mesa, 3 distintos continentes, ¿no? Europa, América, Oceanía, aquí. Y a todos ustedes que están aquí. Entonces, primero de todo, voy a hablar más de la parte de educación previsional de una manera un poco más amplia. Y lo que se pasa es que cuando hablamos de educación previsional, no hay un producto único de educación previsional. Nosotros vimos aquí ejemplos de eso, ¿no? Y maneras innovativas, nuevas, ¿no? Innovaciones para tratar de este problema. Entonces, en algunos casos, puede ser un video de 1 minuto, puede ser suficiente para nuestro objetivo. En otros casos, podemos necesitar de un conocimiento más aprofundizado y que se necesita algo con una maestría para hacer. Entonces, debemos ver exactamente cuáles son nuestros objetivos para saber cuál es el producto más apropiado para ofrecer. Y otra cosa es que Cuando hablamos de pensiones, nosotros no vemos dos extremos en que las personas nada lo saben acerca de previsión social, generalmente algún conocimiento más básico tiene, ni el otro extremo que son todos especialistas. Mismo aquí en esta sala, en esta oficina, probablemente nadie de nosotros sabe de todo acerca de las pensiones de su propio país, porque muchas veces se demandan conocimientos muy especializados al respecto de eso. Entonces, tenemos que saber cuáles son los objetivos y cómo lo que necesita añadir de conocimiento o, en estos casos, como se habló aquí, lo que se intenciona de cambiar de comportamiento para saber cuál es el mejor medio para hacer eso. Entonces, lo que voy a hacer aquí es dividir mi ponencia en dos partes. Una primera parte es saber cuáles son exactamente los objetivos, y cada caso en particular hay objetivos distintos. A partir de entonces, sabiendo cuáles son los objetivos, cuáles son los medios, y también debemos saber cuáles son las limitaciones que un proceso de educación previsional tiene para que no pongamos esperanzas que ello no puede responder. Entonces, primero de todo, ¿cuál es el objetivo? Y pensando de manera más amplia, para saber exactamente cuál es el objetivo de una educación previsional, hay dos preguntas que nosotros debemos contestar. Primera, ¿a quién nosotros queremos entrenar? Porque hay procesos de educación previsional que se destinan a las personas que trabajan en los institutos de previsión social. Entonces, en algunos casos, por ejemplo, nosotros queremos que los empleados tengan un conocimiento más aprofundizado en algo específico. En otras veces, nosotros queremos entrenar, o entonces, como se presentó aquí, no exactamente entrenar, pero inducir a determinados tipos de comportamiento a las personas que utilizan los sistemas previsionales. Entonces, hay que saber, para ver la educación con resultados más efectivos, conocer eso. Y después, saber exactamente qué tipo de categoría de personas que nosotros vamos a entrenar. Porque en Brasil, por ejemplo, nosotros intentamos pasar, no logramos hacerlo, pero nosotros intentamos pasar por un proceso muy amplio de reforma previsional y un grupo en particular que a ellos les interesaba saber más sobre previsión social eran los periodistas, Entonces, a veces hay grupos específicos o de personas que van a utilizar el sistema de previsión social o de personas que van a ofrecer, que necesitan ese tipo de entrenamiento. Entonces, algunas veces hay entrenamiento de las personas que trabajan en los institutos de previsión social, puede ser un entrenamiento más técnico, en algo de la parte jurídica, de la parte actuarial, de la parte financiera, o puede ser un entrenamiento de saber lo básico para comunicar a las personas. Entonces, ese es el primer paso. ¿A qué grupo específicamente destinamos a entrenar o entonces cambiar o inducir a un determinado tipo de comportamiento? Después de saber a quién vamos a direccionar esta educación, la pregunta que se sigue es ¿por qué estamos a hacerlo? Aquí, en este taller, lo que veo es el comportamiento, el objetivo que me parece ser el foco principal, no el único, pero el foco principal parece ser la cuestión de ampliar el ahorro, o inducir el comportamiento de ampliación del ahorro. Eso puede ser un objetivo, pero En otras situaciones no es exactamente eso, ¿no? Puede ser ampliar la cobertura, ¿no? Puede ser hacer con que las personas tengan una noción de la sustentabilidad de los sistemas previsionales, ¿no? En su país, de sí, de ella misma, pero del país como un todo. Entonces, por ejemplo, yo llegué no tan lejos como ti, pero llegué también ayer y vi la televisión y había un canal de España en que se mostraba un debate, no era educación previsional, pero era un debate largo, grande, con varias personas a respecto de la sustentabilidad del sistema previsional de España, ¿no? Y es, por ejemplo, en Brasil, tener un conocimiento para la población como un todo respecto de la sustentabilidad de la previsión social es algo muy importante, ¿no? Porque es algo que de la propia comunicación de la reforma previsional que es importante para las personas saberem para hacer un proceso de narrativa y de convencimiento a respecto de la necesidad de la reforma. Entonces, tenemos que saber por qué. Este por qué puede ser tanto desde el punto de vista de personas que utilizan los sistemas de previsión social, como las personas que trabajan en el sistema de previsión social. Entonces, lo que veo en Brasil, por ejemplo, ¿no? Es un país muy grande, ¿no? Hay varias municipalidades, ¿no? Gobiernos locales, y estos gobiernos locales, muchos de ellos, no ni todos, pero muchos de ellos tienen sus propios regímenes de previsión social. Y en algunas situaciones hay una necesidad de actualización del cadastro, ¿no? De los datos de los pensionados, jubilados, las personas que todavía contribuyen, ¿no? para el régimen. Entonces, ¿cómo se hace eso? ¿Cuál es la mejor manera de hacer eso, ¿no? Las normas jurídicas, ellas cambian, ¿no? Nosotros vemos reformas previsionales en todo el mundo, el tiempo todo, en esta última década en particular. Entonces, las normas jurídicas cambian. Entonces, puede ser un conocimiento respecto de eso, ¿no? Y actuaria, inversiones. Entonces, vea, el primer punto es saber exactamente cuál es el objetivo, cuál es el grupo de personas que vamos a entrenar y sabiendo el grupo de personas que vamos a entrenar, cuál es el motivo del entrenamiento, o entonces, como se vio aquí, no exactamente entrenamiento, pero algo como inducir o cambiar un comportamiento. Después, sabiendo eso, es cómo hacerlo. Perdón, cuáles son, conociendo nuestros objetivos, sería comprender cuáles son los medios más eficientes para alcanzarlo. Entonces, lo que hacemos, ¿no? Entonces, vimos aquí y un ejemplo, ¿no? Citado aquí, lo que se pasa, por ejemplo, en Inglaterra, es algo muy parecido que se pasa en Brasil, porque muchas veces nosotros, vamos a entrenar las personas para que ellas ahorren más, y lo que se ve es que se simplesmente cambiar el default, ¿no? Para lo que nosotros en Brasil le llamamos adhesión automática, ¿no? Que es auto-enrollment. Se cambia mucho de eso. Entonces, lo que hacer, ¿no? Para nosotros alcanzarmos nuestros objetivos. Entonces, puede ser un cambio, ni educacional, pero un cambio de reglas, ¿no? de lo que las personas deben hacer. Y eso puede incluir, entonces, vea, en función de eso podemos tener, ¿no? como resultados cambios legales que inducen a determinado tipo de comportamento. En Brasil, en particular, ese tipo de cambio que se habló aquí en Inglaterra necesita de un cambio legal para hacerlo, ¿no? Puede ser simples videos, ¿no? Y dependiendo, make it simple, ¿no? hacerlo sencillos, ¿no? Que las personas hoy día no van a tomar mucho de su tiempo para ver algo, entonces algo de poco tiempo, ¿no? Con el mensaje clara, directo, punto, es fundamental, pero dependiendo de las circunstancias, ¿no? Si alguien quiere tener un conocimiento más aprofundizado de actuaria, de legislación, naturalmente que en un video de 1 minuto no será necesario, y puede ser en este caso que sea necesario una maestría, por ejemplo. Otra cosa que es importante de saber, ¿cómo va a ser? Va a ser un entrenamiento presencial, semipresencial, por distancia, ¿no? Y en particular en un país como Brasil, muy grande, ¿no? Hay áreas muy remotas allí. La parte del entrenamiento a distancia y en función de eso el uso de las tecnologías, ¿no? De información y comunicación de modo más efectivo es fundamental para eso, ¿no? Entonces, pero depende de lo que queremos hacerlo, ¿no? Y es importante en ese proceso de educación, entonces, lo que, en términos del medio de hacerlo, y después, cómo hacerlo, ¿no? Cómo hacerlo. Es importante comprender que el trabajo de equipo es fundamental, ¿no? Nadie sabe todo, y mismo si supiera, no tendrá tiempo de trabajar con todo eso. Entonces, dividir, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, caso nosotros, en Brasil, por ejemplo, hay cursos, clases a distancia, ¿no? De pensiones complementarias, ¿no? Pero, naturalmente, que hay personas que conocen la situación de las personas, de las pensiones complementarias, pero no son necesariamente las mejores personas para diseñar un curso de pensión complementaria. Entonces, es necesario, en este caso, ¿no? Hacer un trabajo colectivo en que se añaden expertos en la área, ¿no? Y también personas que conocen la educación, ¿no? Conocen cómo trabajar de esa manera. Entonces, en Brasil en particular, lo que nosotros hacemos es trabajar. Hay escuelas de gobierno, ¿no? Del Ministerio de Planeamiento, Ministerio de Hacienda, hay escuelas de gobierno con toda la estructura que nosotros naturalmente utilizamos esa estructura para separar las atribuciones. Y lo que es fundamental hoy día, y se puso aquí eso, es el uso de la tecnología, ¿no? Nosotros, la educación tradicional, en este caso, ¿no? Que no es un conocimiento convencional, puede ser algo que no sea muy atractivo para las personas, entonces debemos tornarla, este proceso, fácil de las personas acceder, fácil de entender y atractivo para ellos, ¿no? Entonces, muchas de las cosas nosotros podemos, muchas de las dudas, muchos de los, no todos, ni todos, claro, pero muchas de las dudas, muchos de los problemas de las comunicaciones, nosotros podemos resolver con algo muy sencillo, muy corto, ¿no? Entonces, sí, y con eso hacer algo en que una persona pueda accesar en el proceso que ella va de su casa a su trabajo, es muy, muy interesante de hacerlo, ¿no? Entonces, el uso de la tecnología en Brasil es muy utilizado, Facebook, YouTube, como en todos los países, es fundamental para eso. Pero un mensaje importante, ¿no? de hacerlo es que la educación previsional, en su manera más tradicional, ¿no? Como yo estoy hablando aquí, es algo fundamental, es algo importante de hacerlo, pero nosotros debemos saber sus límites, ¿no? nosotros no vamos a resolver el problema de previsión social, cualquier que sea ese problema, solamente por una cuestión de educación previsional. Entonces, solo para citar un ejemplo que es lo que más se discute aquí en este taller, la cuestión del ahorro, ¿no? Nosotros sabemos que ahorro depende de la renta de las personas, ¿no? Las personas muy, muy pobres no van, y aquí en Latinoamérica, en mi país en particular, ¿no? Pero no solo, allá hay muchas personas que son muy, muy pobres, no van a ahorrar porque simplemente no tienen dinero para eso, pero mismo, ¿no? Para las personas con un nivel de renta más alta, depende de incentivos, ¿no? Entonces la educación previsional por sí sola no va a cambiar incentivo tributário o otro tipo de incentivo, depende también de aspectos culturales, ¿no? Entonces, en este caso en particular, lo que la educación previsional puede hacer en este caso es cambiar un poco aspectos culturales. Y en otras situaciones, como repitiendo, ¿no? Lo que se pasa en Brasil, lo que se pasa también por lo que percibí en Inglaterra, otros cambios como automatic enrollment, adhesión automática, pueden todavía ser más efectivos que la educación previsional. Entonces, educación previsional es algo importantísimo, es algo necesario, pero es parte, ¿no? de la solución de un problema más amplio, ¿no? No es la única solución para eso, ¿no? Y es importante cuando pensamos en educación previsional que nosotros sepamos separar cuáles son nuestros objetivos y cuáles son también los mejores medios para alcanzar nuestros objetivos. Entonces debemos saber a quién debemos entrenar, por qué vamos a entrenarlo, los que vamos a entrenarlo y cómo vamos a entrenarlos. Entonces es eso. Muchas gracias por todo.
Les reiteramos que la dinámica es a través de las preguntas que ustedes nos pueden facilitar escribiéndola o nos indican y nuestro personal en el auditorio se acerca con el micrófono para que la haga directamente. Jorge.
Empezamos con una primera pregunta para Joe y Matthew. La voy a leer tal cual. How does the regulator in your country enforces the rule that employers need to auto-enroll their employees in a retirement savings scheme? How easy is for employers to comply? Sorry. How does the regulator in your country enforces the rule that employers need to auto-enroll their employees in a retirement savings scheme? How easy is for employers to comply?
Do you want to start?
No, after you.
All right. So as part of the regulations that were introduced in 2006 to start automatic enrollment, a significant amount of new power was given to the pensions regulator in the UK to run an enforcement regime because it was recognized that initially the level of compliance, particularly for small employers, might be quite low, but employers might seek either to simply fail to report and complete their duty as a way of avoiding the cost of contributions, or that they might induce or persuade their workers to opt out. Because if you're a small employer and you say to your worker, look, I can't afford this, you know, I'd love to be able to put some money in your pension, but if you join this scheme, it's going to put me out of business. So, you know, I want to ask you to do that. So it's illegal to do that, and the enforcement of that, as well as the enforcement of the employer completing quite a strong set of reporting duties, all now sits with the pensions regulator. And as a way of trying to make that new enforcement regime work, the regulator's been quite active in identifying employers who failed to comply with their duties, taking them to court and imposing fines. So there's been quite a number of quite visible cases recently where the regulator's done that. So the hope is that there's a kind of visible enforcement regime that's been introduced that will encourage employers to do that. But I think the really important part of the question, beyond the regulatory aspect, is this question of how easy it is for employers to comply. Because the burden for employers in calculating the amount of contributions that each worker is entitled to, in managing the changes to their payroll systems that are required to take care of all of this work is quite large. And I think one of the things that's often ignored in looking at the way employers are going to respond to these kind of reforms is what that's like for a small employer. Because the employers who are quite vocal and have their voices heard in a system are generally the large employers, and large employers normally find it easy to do things automatically for maybe many thousands of people. But if you're running a small business with maybe 100 employees or 5 employees, and you've got to do some quite complicated calculations and a lot of extra work, that might be quite a big burden. So one of the things that's actually been much more important in a way in the UK is not so much the role of regulators, but the role of the payroll industry and the software industry in providing tools that make it as easy as possible for employers to do the calculations, make the deductions, transmit the contributions. So this really has to be done in quite a joined-up way across industry. And again, it's back to the theme of the day. I think technology, although it's not always the technology that you see, the technology that moves the money around under the surface and automates things as much as possible for the employers has played a really crucial role.
It's similar in New Zealand. Again, the regulator has been given additional powers to enforce compliance. Again, it's been left to the likes of Xero and other payroll providers to actually come up with solutions. The only thing that's slightly different in New Zealand that actually helps matters is in New Zealand, the IRD, the Inland Revenue Department, so the government department that collects taxes, is actually used as a central clearinghouse for all payments that are sent through to KiwiSaver providers, so through to pension providers. That gives an additional level of comfort that compliance is taking place and additional reporting. It also helps to make things easier for the firms to comply and removes one of the complaints or one of the barriers for compliance within the companies.
Una pregunta para Marcelo, y es, ¿a quién debe ir dirigida la educación previsional y por quiénes? Y solo de mi parte agregar que si es un reto en sociedades desarrolladas como la inglesa y la de Nueva Zelanda, en nuestros países donde hay un menor nivel de educación y un menor nivel de, ya no solo de alfabetización financiera, sino alfabetización, este reto de a quién educar y por quién.
Este es un problema grande en economías como la de nosotros, ¿no? Porque, mira, nosotros muchas veces tenemos problemas como las personas no saben leer derecho, no saben hacer contas básicas, y muchas veces cuando yo veo esas discusiones de educación financiera, educación previsional, muchos de los educadores colocan, mira, pero los niños ni saben hacer las contas más básicas, ni saben hacer leer derecho, entonces ¿cómo nosotros vamos a enseñar filosofía, sociología u otras muchas cosas que se añaden a eso? Entonces, en ese aspecto, ¿no? Lo que se pasa, yo no creo que la educación previsional sea algo para se colocar en el currículo tradicional de las escuelas, pero conociendo esta manera debe ser algo bien, nosotros podemos tener suceso en eso, haciendo cosas muy sencillas, ¿no? Porque las personas, mismo las personas con el nivel de educación más bajo, ellas tienen su teléfono celular. En Brasil, la inclusión digital en ese aspecto es muy grande. Casi todas las personas tienen WhatsApp, tienen Facebook. Y esas personas ven videos, esas personas, entonces puede así, esas personas ven televisión. Mira, ellas, si nosotros hacemos algo sencillo, hay que ver cuál es el objetivo, lo que queremos hacer, ¿no? Y nosotros podemos hacer por medio de videos, lo que veo hoy día, ¿no? Videos más sencillos o textos más cortitos, ¿no? Y directo al punto, fácil, para algo como que dura más hoy día do que 3 minutos, es algo que las personas no van a ver. Entonces, es algo así. Pero, al mismo tiempo, hay personas de un nivel educacional más alto, ¿no? Que quieren conocer mejor las cosas. Entonces, son entrenamientos distintos. Pero podemos hacer de esta manera, ¿no? Para las personas del nivel educacional más bajo, o mismo del nivel educacional más alto, pero que no tienen tiempo, ¿no? O no quieren saber algo en profundidad, ¿no? Pero quieren ter solo el conocimiento más sencillo, se puede hacer cosas de ese estilo. Y, mismo así, como se pasa, como se ha dicho aquí, la experiencia de otros países, hay maneras de cambiar las acciones que no son necesariamente por las educaciones. Entonces, solo citando por la educación, solo citando un ejemplo, en Brasil también pasa así, y creo que son países distintos, ¿no? Brasil, Reino Unido, no son países parecidos en ese sentido. En todo el mundo, la previsión social, ela es obligatoria, ¿no? ¿Y por qué es obligatoria? Porque simplemente pues, dejamos a las personas a elegir si van a tener previsión social, ni complementar social o no, las personas simplemente van a elegir a no tenerlos, ¿no? Entonces, hay que ver que hay maneras de cambiar el comportamiento que no se pasa solamente por la educación previsional. Entonces, estas cosas como auto-enrollment o entonces, en la previsión social, la inscripción compulsoria son alternativas, ¿no? Para eso.
Okay. Ahora, una última pregunta para Matthew, muy cortita. Expectations of auto-escalation. Expectations of auto-escalation.
Auto-escalation, yeah, it's a very good question. So I didn't talk about the details of the reform program, but just this month, a really big and important stage has been reached in the auto-enrollment policy in the UK, which is for the first time the minimum contributions that the employer and the employee have to make have increased. And that's going to happen again in April next year. So initially, only 2% contribution was being deducted from the worker, well, but was being made on behalf of the worker. Normally, the worker would make half of that contribution, the employer would make the other half. As of this month, the total contribution has gone up to 5%, and then next year it will go up to 8%. That's based on theoretical work by people like Shlomo Benazzi, Richard Thaler, behavioral scientists, who've been working a lot with employers in the US, where a lot of the really groundbreaking work in behavioral finance and pensions has been done, that's based on principles around procrastination and loss aversion. So this idea that we're more likely to be willing to have the cost of something increase in the future than we are to pay more today. It's very natural. And this is a really good example of one of those sorts of behavioral innovations that, again, goes with the grain of our behavioral biases. Rather than trying to impose a cost on someone straight away, we know that people treat a loss, the cost, as being much more painful than the equivalent gain would give them pleasure. But if you make that loss happen a little bit in the future, they feel that pain much less acutely. So that policy was implemented in the UK as a way of gradually moving people into an 8% contribution rather than trying to introduce an 8% contribution straight away. And one of the really interesting questions that raises is when people see the amount of money coming out of their pay packet increase this year, and they see it again increasing next year, does that mean that they'll stop saving? You know, because we've only seen so far, all the data I've shown you so far is only based on the initial cost of just 1%, which is not very much. And in a couple of years' time, they'll be paying 5% of their money. That's a big change. We think that won't affect the number of people saving very much, but nobody's ever really tried to do this kind of thing on this scale before, so we'll keep you all posted. We'll let you all know how that goes over the next couple of years. But there is a bigger question here, which is 8% enough? You know, when the contributions increase to 8% for everyone next year, will people be saving enough? And For some people, it probably will be enough when you add that saving to a reasonably generous social security system in retirement and a state-backed guaranteed pension. That might be enough for a lot of people. But for people who earn closer to the sort of median level of earnings in the UK, it's probably not enough. And the question now is, should government keep increasing those levels? Is that something that should be imposed on employers and on individuals? Or should we be looking at more voluntary ways of trying to encourage and nudge people into saving more? And that's a question that's currently being looked at by government and not one that we have the answer to yet, but it's going to be a very interesting area of policy development.
Bueno, muchas gracias a los expositores.